You're listening to Actors with Issues with Juan Ayala, a podcast of actors, by actors, and for actors. In today's episode, we speak with actors and husband and wife, Joe Truglio and Beth Dover, from the new scripted podcast in dark comedy, The Bystanders, available now on Apple Podcasts. Beth, Joe, thank you both so much for being here on the show. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
So I'm curious, with this being sort of a scripted podcast, and both of you are known for having very long careers in comedies, whether it's animation or voiceover roles, or of course multicam and single cam shows. But I'm curious, with a completely non-visual medium like a podcast, did you find it difficult to sort of like adapt to that sort of form of comedy that was completely non-visual?
I loved it. I thought it was so fun. Because it felt like a throwback, it's like radio plays from back in the day. So it felt super fun, and I got to work with Joe, and we got to do it from our office back there. So it was pretty great all around, I would say.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. It wasn't too much of an adjustment. I felt like the timing is always so important with comedy, and that's something that you could still have with radio or just audio mediums like that. So it was not too much of an adjustment.
And we were also able to record together at the same time, so we were able to sort of improvise a little bit with each other and sort of play off of each other.
That's a great point. Yeah, it really did help the timing, and just the overlap was great to have Beth in the room with me while we did it.
That was actually my next question, if you both got to sort of record together. So that I'm sure that, as you said, sort of left lots of room for play. And with the rise of the popularity of scripted podcasts, especially during the pandemic, when, there were no commutes to listen to the radio or anything like that, everyone was sort of just like stuck at home. Were there any particular, maybe scripted or even non-scripted podcasts that you two became fans of over the last couple of years during the pandemic?
I'm a podcast freak. I listen to podcasts all the time because maybe I just can't be alone with my own thoughts. I'm not sure, but I just sent a list to my friends today of like 20 podcasts that I'm listening to. But in terms of the narrative ones, I just started they're sort of, that was the silver lining of the pandemic, I think, is there's all these different sort of mediums to, do your craft, right? So you have like these new sort of narrative audio things.
I hadn't really listened to any scripted podcasts. This was one of the first, if not the first one that I've done. No, I did like we did some Storybots actually.
We did.
Podcasts. But I haven't listened to a lot of them. The podcasts I do listen to are often kind of interview based or nonfiction based. So it was fun. It was a fun kind of world to kind of dive into.
Floyd, that's our dog. Come on, second.
You've got sirens.
I'm gonna just pick him up and we'll continue this. Sure. So sorry.
But yeah, it was very. I really enjoyed it. It was very new to me. It took a little bit of getting used to, knowing that a lot of the world will be added in terms of the soundscape and everything. And I think that in ones that I have listened to, that makes just such a world of difference when you're experiencing it for the first time. But it was all very new and very cool to be part of.
Yeah, sure.
And with, you guys have such a star-studded cast. I mean, the list goes on with, Darren Criss, Heather Morris being producer, Margaret Cho, Kathleen Turner. And I'm curious, have you gotten to work with any of those other cast members previously to the podcast?
Yeah, I worked with Margaret on Good on Paper, and she's so awesome. I love her. She's so authentically herself in every way, and she's so funny and talented and just the best.
I was lucky enough to, Margaret I've met, I've never worked with her, hopefully someday. But I've worked with Jane Lynch, who is a comedy icon and a legend for sure, in a movie called Role Models. And
that's right. Yeah.
I did a table read with Jane for Wreck-It Ralph. And we both ended up having voices in the movie as well. So that was the only.
And then we worked with her when we did in Party Down, and then
of course,
and then the David's one that never got picked up. The soap opera Today's Special. Yeah.
Oh, yes,
we did like a pilot that never got picked up.
Jane is fantastic.
She's so talented. Yeah. She's the best.
Right.
But I was pretty excited. Kathleen Turner has an iconic voice.
Oh yeah.
And so when we were doing the read through on the Zoom, I was pinching myself that I was on a Zoom with Kathleen Turner and just getting to hear her read with that just iconic voice. So it was very cool. I was very excited to get to,
be in the same Zoom
I was about to say be in the same Zoom room because we work together, but like, I don't know, it's still very cool.
Yeah, that's definitely a new saying. Is you're no longer sort of, even with auditions, you're not in the room. You're more like in the Zoom waiting room.
Don't I know it? Don't I know it?
And with the name of our show being actors,
commercials have started to come back in person, which I like.
Oh
Because what
yeah,
I'm realizing is I miss peripheral friends, like people who aren't necessarily your closest friends, but people you get to see in audition rooms.
Mhm.
And I miss that. I miss going into the rooms and seeing people and maybe going for coffee afterwards, that kind of thing. So it's starting to come back little by little.
Mhm. And with the name of our show being Actors with Issues, we always sort of talk about career obstacles and hurdles that our guests have overcome to share some advice with our audience of young artists. And sort of speaking on the pandemic, what would you say was maybe one of the biggest lessons you learned throughout the pandemic, whether it was about acting, auditioning, or just having a career as an actor?
Well, I don't know if it was because of the pandemic per se, but I've always tried to write when I'm not acting. I know a lot of actors aren't writers, and that's okay too. But I've always found some way to be creative. So whether, like Beth, for instance, I can take classes sometimes during the downtime. But in terms of advice for younger actors, I would urge them to understand that every actor has their own timeline. I'm pretty impatient, and if I were to tell a younger Joe one thing, it would be just keep at it, and your time will get there. You don't really have any control over that as much as you think you do. It's not about getting your representation or being in the one thing. It's just knowing that you're staying true to your path, and it's hard because you'll have other actor friends perhaps that have more success at the time, and it's very difficult to be excited for them, although you are without any shred of jealousy. But
you know what they call that? Compare and despair.
Compare and despair,
which is a terrible thing. Don't compare and despair. You're all on your own journey and your own path.
Yeah, and it's hard to remember that. It's very easy to say that now, me being 50. So it's hard for a 23-year-old to know that, but it is really true. So my friend John Hamm, and I will name drop, only to tell this story, is that before I knew John for quite a bit before Mad Men, and I had some success up until that point, and I was experiencing not a nice period of unemployment. And John and I and some friends were playing some poker, and he was always very funny. And I was saying to myself, and he wasn't working, I was like, if this guy can't get a job, like if he's having trouble getting a job, what am I doing? Like, this is nuts. And again, a year or two later, that role came, and he was working before that. You just had never heard of him. He was doing stuff here and there. So that's the only reason I bring it up. It's to my earlier point. It's just you have to kind of stay focused and know that your time will come.
But in terms of the pandemic, I learned a lot about ring lights, a lot about putting myself on tape, a lot about editing an iMovie, a lot about, which room has the best natural light. That's what I learned during the pandemic in terms of my acting career. Yeah.
And with so I'm a firm believer that with any role that one has, there's always something to be learned, whether it's a one-line co-star or the lead in a play or a series regular role. So I'm curious, with the Bystanders, what would you say you learned during that process of voicing these roles?
Ooh.
Well, I learned that I love voiceover. I mean, I got to do some Bob's Burgers, which was so fun, and but I haven't had the most experience with voiceover stuff. You have. But I love it. It's so fun.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough question in terms specific to this character. I learned maybe to explore explore character traits in your voice that perhaps in a visual medium you don't think as much about.
Mm.
Um, and so I guess I was very aware of the tone of my voice, and if it was very quick and very fast, perhaps I'm portraying a very nervous guy, and do I want to portray someone like that? And so I guess I just became more aware of how my actual voice was informing the listener of what type of character I was.
And with the years that you've both been in this industry, I'm curious, what have you noticed has changed the most about either the entertainment industry as a whole or about like sort of what it takes to be an actor since you both first got started?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I used to go to Samuel French and which was like a bookstore, and I literally take a book and look at what the agents were and write the agent's address on a piece of paper and then walk into that agency with a headshot. It was like very analog. So
Yeah.
for me, you having a social media presence and an Instagram presence, that kind of thing, TikTok, all that kind of stuff is more important, I think, for younger people coming up, and something that I don't know as much about, right? So I think it has shifted in that way, and that's not the
I
only
mean,
way
I for me, it's shifted tremendously. It's like night and day. It's like it's almost an industry that I almost don't recognize in terms of what it takes to become an actor. Like, I get very impatient that I am self-taping. Like, I hate it. I don't like
Yeah.
it. Beth
I like
teases
it.
about me all the time. Like, I like being in a room. I feel like part of getting a job as an actor, besides doing the role and the character, is conveying in the room how affable you are and how nice it is for you to be around, because that's really what matters when you're making a movie or on television set. Does this director, does this writer, does this producer want to be around you? Like, what do you like to be physically around? And that you can't do that with self-tape. You can't do that in Zoom. And so
But you don't have to be in traffic.
but you don't have to be in traffic. Yeah, I don't.
You don't have to change in your car on the highway.
That's true. Like, there's other advantages, but like for me, having been used to that aspect of the audition, not having that is a challenge for me to kind of see where else can I substitute that. But the advantage for young actors that do have to self-tape and do have to edit, they're becoming filmmakers, which I think is even more important in a way, because of the platforms that you have, social media and especially YouTube, that you actually can get your voice out and who you are as a creator and as a creative person more than I ever was able to do as just an actor going into a room. So many actors now have the advantage of being writer, director, actors.
And at the end of the day, the thing that is the same is being creative with your friends and creating your own material and just continuing to do that. That has stayed consistent throughout my experience as an actor. I think, I got to work with, friends and doing improv, and then we would have our sketch groups, and then we would make back then they were called vlogs or whatever. We would do little web series, and then they would, so, I think all of that, and you obviously with the state and everything, you guys met in college and you created things with your friends. So I think it's very important to establish community, and that's something that hasn't changed.
Yeah. What thing hasn't changed is the actor continually having to wake up every morning and say, how badly do I want this? Do I still want to do this? Does this still bring me joy? Am I still happy doing this? Because it's 99% rejection. It's no. Everyone knows that. So you have to do some deep dives sometimes. Often actually, and say, hey, am I still here for the right reasons?
And wrapping up with the Bystander, what do you so at this point that we're recording this episode, the first episode of the Bystanders has dropped, and it's a weekly release if I remember correctly. So I'm curious, what are each of you looking forward to most for fans of the show to discover and find out with the show?
Well, we're both new to the show, and I hope, like, Beth and I love working together, and we've been able to do that, lucky enough to do that in many different shows. And there's a unique, I think, back and forth that we have that we hope adds to the world of Bystanders.
But also, I think just the cast is so great, and it's such a wild ride. Like, we get kidnapped and we're all in there together, and I won't spoil anything, but it's just great. I mean, it's like it's kind of an action-packed kind of
very silly. There's some very silly,
Yes.
absurd things that happen, and we're looking forward to that.
Yes, it's silly and thrilling. So
Yeah.
we're excited to hear the
It's a
rest.
siller.
It's a siller.
It's
silly.
similar. Awesome. Well, Beth, Joe, thank you both so much for taking the time to chat with us today and for talking about the issues. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so
Thanks
much.
for having us.
Absolutely.
Have a great weekend.
Thanks for joining us. Be sure to subscribe to Actors with Issues on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts, and visit our YouTube channel for full video interviews. Actors with Issues is executive produced and hosted by Juan Ayala. See you next time.